Hello and welcome back. Did you have good breakout sessions? Any kind of shows of hands, any thumbs? Did you have good breakout sessions? Okay, yeah, good, thank you. Did you meet anyone new in the break? Did you talk to anyone new? Hands if you talked to someone new? Yes, okay, good. Do you still know their names? No? Well, in that case, go to LinkedIn, get connected with them, and also go to the LinkedIn page of the Impact Days. We're going to move on with the next section with SDG number 10, reduced inequality, equality and inclusion, and innovation across sectors. The SDGs are based on the understanding that the prosperity of business, as well as the well-being of society and the environment, are all interconnected. And this is why we need this innovation across all sectors, so that we can really address the issues of inequality and become a more fair and inclusive society. And we'd like to kick off this section with the presentation of a study on impact innovation and also its importance for Austria as a business location. And for this, it's my great pleasure to welcome with me on stage Barbara Kudenhofer-Kalergi. She's the policy advisor and at the Department of Education and Society at the Federation of Austrian Industries, together with Kambis Kohansal-Vachagar. He's the head of startup services at the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber. Please give it up to them. Kambis, Barbara, great to have you with us. So you're going to tell us a bit more about this study. Maybe let's start it off with, what was the purpose of this study? Why did you even do it?
Yes, I deal with socio-political issues at the Federation of Austrian Industries. So innovation is very important to us as a most essential contribution of business to society. So we have a tradition of supporting and building up the ecosystem for social innovation and social businesses in Austria for many years. And with this study, we wanted to find out how the entire business landscape in Austria is doing on social innovation, impact innovation. And our hypothesis was that many more companies than they themselves are aware of, and even we are aware of, are producing impact innovation. And this assessment proved to be true, and we are very happy about this.
Yeah, and to add on this, there hasn't been a study similar like this in Austria yet, so to put it into real numbers. And from a Chamber of Commerce, it was important to really analyze the impact of founders and startups within the segment of impact innovation. And not just how they contribute to the effect, but also when they start collaborating with more established traditional companies, what's the effect? Is it higher or not? And yes, I can tell you it's higher. So we have our own team within the Chamber of Commerce, which is responsible for innovation and digital transformation and the work and focus on emerging technologies. And these technologies build the basis for even more impact innovation in future. So we have established an innovation map contributing or consisting of all these emerging technologies. And we use this also to conduct a study with the very positive effects. Yeah.
Okay, so looking at the outcomes now, what are your key takeaways?
I want to start actually with the biggest challenge, not the biggest key takeaway, but the biggest challenge was how to define impact innovation in order to quantify it, because I think we all have a pretty good idea what it is, what social innovation is, what impact innovation is, however you want to call it. But to quantify it is a completely new approach needed, and this was also statistical new territory. So we defined impact innovation as the sum of all R&D activities and innovations that are carried out with the intention to bring about positive social and or ecological effects. Actually to make it tangible, to count it, you can go two ways. You can assess the direct economic significance, and you can assess the effects triggered by applications and the use of innovations that come out. So this is what we did, and then you had to collect statistical data about R&D expenditures about R&D turnovers generated, about associated employment, and then you also look at the goals of innovation, of the socio-economic goals of innovations by sectors, and this is how you count it, how you make it tangible.
And to put it into numbers, so when we conducted the study, it was revealed that approximately 1.5 billion in euros was added. So there was a net added value of 1.5 billion euros to the Austrian economy. That's one thing. The second thing is that every company that contributes to impact innovation, either it's a startup or a big corporation, all the jobs summed up together are around 17,000 jobs that are created by impact innovation. So for Austria, who knows the Austrian economy, that's a huge numbers. And not just the direct effect, but there were follow-up effects on 4 different segments. One was education, educational performance in Austria. One was public health. One was work productivity, and the last one was energy efficiency. So there was not just a direct effect to the economy, but follow-up effects because of impact innovation created by companies. And this was very important for us to put it into numbers and show it within the study.
In the panel that we had before, we also heard a lot about policy. So I suppose it's also something that was important here. What are the kind of political conditions that organizations or companies would need themselves to foster that impact innovation themselves?
Yeah, I think first of all actors, political actors, but also business actors have to understand what impact innovation actually is. Yeah. So we need to raise awareness there, and also because you mentioned the SDGs, I think it helps to look at the SDGs as business opportunities, which is an orientation that you can make. But to foster impact innovation in Austria, you apart from financial incentives, you have to focus also on the education system. So we need to modernize our education system. We need to foster entrepreneurial culture, digital skills, tech skills. I think we need to foster employee engagement and employee stock options, because there's a direct link between employee engagement and innovation also. And in terms of funding programs, I believe very strongly that impact innovation should be an integral part of all the funding programs that we have. Maybe even, if I had a wish open, with a special focus on impact innovation for and in the educational system.
Now getting back to the topics of startups and companies, smaller companies, founders and so on. So everyone who has been a startup founder knows money is very important. So now getting back to what kind of political conditions do you need? Yeah, the ratio, the amount of venture capital and private equity is very important to foster more impact innovation, particularly for startup companies, founders, and so on. So one thing is to introduce tax incentives that leverage even more impact innovation. That's one thing. The second thing is that we have a pretty great public grants mechanism here in Austria, but also on European level. So we have the Horizon Europe initiative, which has or tries to tackle all the societal challenges we have, when a lot of public grants are initiated or contribute to more impact innovation. The same you can see here in Austria with the national grants we have. We have the FFG, which is the Austrian promotion or Austrian Research Promotion Agency, and the AWS, which is the Austrian Promotional Bank. They have different grants that really focus on creating impact within companies. So they have a positive impact on the development, and what we can do is to foster them even more with money, with public funding, to create even more impact innovation in the future. And last, just to mention it, the regulatory framework certainly is also important. So regulatory sandboxes where new products, new innovation can be tested out, roll out, also deliver and contribute to this impact innovation, to the field of impact innovation. So these 3 different factors that are very relevant to foster more impact innovation within a society.
And if we kind of zoom out a bit from the results that you found in the study, what's the impact that a study like that can have on impact innovation in Austria, but maybe even beyond in Europe?
So we will definitely use the study to raise awareness for impact innovation, what it is in the business community, also in the political arena. I think the data or the approach to data is very exciting. So I really hope that also other European countries and other actors kind of using this approach in the future to grasp the significance, the economic significance of impact innovation and this ecosystem that has built up here. And yeah, I mean, we will spread the word. I'm very excited about this, actually.
Well, and I think for raising awareness, this is also a great audience to present it to. So maybe just the final question is, where can we find the study?
It's still a secret. No, we are still working on the results, and we still are refining our claims, our wishes that we have. And I mean, there's so much potential. The study is really huge. So please be patient a little bit more, but of course we will present it.
Exactly. Just take a look at it as a teaser. So we're working on it. There will be next steps, and then we will use this study to foster even more impact innovation here in Austria, but maybe even more.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barbara and Kammes. We're very much looking forward to that. Thank you for presenting it.
Thank you. Bye.
We'd like to move on to a very specific example. And for this, again, a question to the audience. Who knows the Vollpension in Vienna? Yeah, fan club, here you go. To all the ones who don't know Vollpension. Vollpension is a social business that basically wants to bridge generations with intergenerational coffee shops. And the core piece of the Vollpension is really the grandpas and grandmas who bake and host in the coffee houses. So in case you haven't been there, make sure to go there as long as you are in Vienna. It's my great pleasure to have one of the grannies with me here now on stage. Doris is grandma on duty at the Vollpension since 2019. Please give it up for Doris. Hello.
Hi.
I'm very happy to have you with me on stage, and I have to confess we've had a bit of a chat before.
Right.
So you have told me a very fascinating life story of yours. You were born in Austria, but then life led you to Australia. You've lived in Australia, in Austria, Russia, Spain, and you came back to Austria three years ago.
That's right.
You told me when you came back you wanted to get your pension and you figured out it's not that easy. There are a lot of bureaucratic hurdles. So you kind of looked out for new ways to also earn a bit of money, and you found the Vollpension in 2019.
That's right.
Can you tell us what happened then? What did the Vollpension do to your life?
Well, I applied in July 2019, and there weren't any vacancies at the time. But very soon afterwards, the second venue of the Vollpension was opened. And then I had an interview, and I was employed. And I've been with the Vollpension since then. Like everybody else, we've had some lockdowns, but I've been working in the main venue as often as it's been open, or for the takeaway sessions. For me and for my colleagues, the grandmas and grandpas who work there, the baking grandmas and, like me, the grandma on duty, we have, for us, it's a great project. It really is. What it means for me is additional income to supplement my very meager pension. It also means I get to socialize in a way that I would otherwise not be able to do, because as an older person without a family, it's not that easy to make a natural connection with younger people. And our working together, the younger people and the older people, is working out really well. We learn from each other, we can help each other out. There's been some great friendships forged, and everybody can do what they do best, really. for me, also working there means that I can use some of my skills, because quite obviously over a longish life, you get a few skills together. I can use my languages. I can use some of my organizational skills, my planning skills. I think for most of us also what it means is that we can be part of something bigger. And I think that's what everybody wants, whether you're older or younger. You actually want to contribute. You want to feel that you, in some even small way, make a difference and are able to help out. Or
I think it's beautiful how you describe that, how you can contribute as well, that it's kind of it's not a one-way direction, it's a two-way direction.
Absolutely.
That the older people also do contribute a lot, and that it might be something that we are not that aware of often.
Yeah, I think there is a tendency to put older people in a box, to actually retire them out of social life and out of life when they are retired, and that is simply just not necessary and not the case. We do have a lot to contribute, and I think really this social inclusion project that the Vollpension is offering and managing is totally a win-win situation, because while we as older people have an opportunity to supplement our pensions and to expand our social circle and be part of something, all the while the Vollpension is offering fabulous cakes.
Yes.
And a really fabulous environment.
Exactly.
It's very important to be able to offer that for people to come together.
Yes, I think that is the essential, that people come together at the Vollpension. And also the Vollpension has been very innovative in the past 2 years and has set up new projects during the pandemic, amongst others, the Bakeademy, so that I get it right, where we can also watch online baking courses and learn to bake there. And I understand you're also part of it. Thank you so much, Doris, for coming here today. I hope you're going to be with us a bit longer. Give it up for Doris. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And with this, we're going to jump into the next panel on equality and inclusion, innovation across sectors. Once again, let me just briefly introduce our moderator and the speakers. Our moderator is Christine Siegel. She's the head of EMEA and director of 100% network at Tonique, which is a global community of asset owners who are looking to deepen the positive impact of their asset owners. Hello, good to have you with us. Please give it up. Next on stage with me, Gerda Holzinger-Burgstaller, CEO of Erste Bank. Oh, yes, please give it up. We've got Gabriela Gandl, who's the board member and former executive director of the Impact Hub Global. Simon Bond is the director of responsible investment portfolio management at Columbia Threadneedle, another global asset manager. And we have Rana Sincere Silal, who works at the intersection of research, practice, and learning, and supports social investors in increasing their impact. Sorry, I got you. Sorry, here I got you. And Simon is with us online, and it's great to have you with us on stage. You enjoy your panel.
Thank you so much, Katharina, for these introductions. And I'm really honored to be here together with these change makers in the social field to moderate this panel. This morning, or actually just after lunch, we heard a lot about the environment. But now we really want to dive a little bit deeper into the social side. And because thinking, the environment is very much linked together with the social side. We shouldn't, see that separately, but really integrate it. Like thinking about, climate refugees, for example, and migrants that came out of that. How can we also include them, in a society and in a system that works? By now, there is so much evidence that having diverse teams in terms of race or geography or age, as we just heard with the Granny Doris, or gender, that they actually also create better results. But still, somehow, the world has not really broadly embraced the full potential of an all-talent team. But luckily, there are a few things and a few organizations that really are on the forefront on creating a system that is more inclusive and really considers equity. And so we thought for you to get to know us a little bit better, we'd just do a little round of introduction in terms of why we personally got involved in the topic of equality and inclusion. And you heard it, now I lead the EMEA region for Tonic, this global network of investors. But originally, I come from the traditional finance side. I used to be a portfolio manager at several private banks. And there, yes, the topic gender, I often was the only woman there. And that's how I naturally got interested in it. But obviously now diversity is so much more. That is like why I got involved, really focusing also on the social side. But Gerda, how about you? How did you personally get involved and also with your organization?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for having me. I think maybe in this community, I don't need to introduce Erste Group or Erste Bank, but still maybe a few sentences on Erste and why equality is so close to our hearts as Erste. It's funny when we looked into the SDG number 10 and talking about equality and this access to financial services. I think it's super important, and many of you know that we are a bank with more than a 200 years history, and actually already in our founding document it was written that we have to grant access to financial services to everybody, irrespective of gender, of nationality, of the social status. So I think this is our purpose. It has been there for 200 years and it will stay with us. And that's why it's so close to us as Erste. And to me personally, I'm not only CEO of Erste Bank Österreich, I also used to be a board member of Zweite Sparkasse. I think one of the great examples that we do within Erste Group.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing a few examples of that in a little bit. Then Gabriela, you at Impact Hub, also doing a lot in terms of really equality and inclusion. How did you personally get involved in it?
Well, personally, obviously, I'm a woman in a leadership position, so that's definitely a very personal situation. I have been so for a long time, so as you said, oftentimes in situations where I might have been the only woman doing that. I have been very active in the youth development movement and also very active in the migrant entrepreneurship and migrant integration movements as a migrant as well, coming from Eastern Europe. So. That's personal. As Impact Hub, we're also very strongly engaged on the gender lens, on migrants, and also on youth. And we're currently developing our competencies on working with senior entrepreneurship and also with people with disabilities, be it physical or mental. And we're happy to share about that. We have about 24,000 such entrepreneurs and innovators around the world in 63 countries. And inclusion is an issue everywhere in the world. Yes, in Europe, yes, in Central Eastern Europe, but it's a really global topic. So happy to bring some of that to the conversation.
Thank you. Looking forward to hearing more. And Rana, you really work at the intersection of research, working with philanthropists, investors, but how did it get started for you?
Well, I think it started from a very personal vantage point for me. And what was most formative for me was growing up exposed to three very different contexts. So the United States, Turkey, and Cyprus. And that led me to embrace and appreciate difference and complexity. But it also led me to be aware of the ways in which that difference can be a source of exclusion. And so whether it's my own family circumstances, you realize that one person can have more or less options depending on their gender, where they're born, the kinds of circumstances that they're born into, whether they're living in a context of economic instability or political violence. And so I was very sensitized to these kinds of dynamics at a very young age, understanding the influence of history, of social and cultural norms, and it made me want to learn and understand what are the conditions that need to be in place for people who face injustice to be able to have fair opportunities to flourish and thrive. And I was very intrigued by, eventually, over time, by the role of finance and the role of the financial system in both positive and negative ways within this equation, and also the role of social movements. And that informs a lot of the work that I do today, advising philanthropies and impact investors on how they can tackle inequality.
Thank you, Rana. We're looking forward to hearing more examples of that. But now over to Simon, who's joining us from London. Simon, when we talked, you also shared a very personal story at the beginning of your career, how you also got into, the social side of investing.
Yes, thank you very much. There may be a slight delay that I can hear this end, but greetings from London. We are currently celebrating our own grandmother, who's been on the throne of Great Britain for 70 years. And we've got the next 4 days to support that. But my story goes back some 30 years ago. Originally, of my 36 years in the market, I started off with equities. But with my name, of course, I had to transition into bonds, which I did some 30 years ago. And when I was an analyst looking at the bond market, the first entity that I ever analysed was a social housing provider that was providing for the benefit of the London poor. And that particular housing provider was a trust called Peabody Trust. And this was a trust set up by George Peabody in 1865 for the benefit of the London poor. And that particular entity was still delivering impact through social housing and through the bond market funding of that social housing. That left me with a deep impression that this hard-nosed financial world that I'd entered into could actually do some good for society, as well as giving you the returns that you should expect. And so years later, some 10 years ago, Big Issue came through the door at Columbia Threadneedle and said, we want to launch a product that we can direct people to that basically shares our values. And that experience, that impression, all of that particular element of what the bond market could do, should do, and if I have anything to do with it, will be doing, came flooding out. And we launched the UK Social Bond Fund some 8.5 years ago. And more importantly, we have just reached another anniversary, the 5-year anniversary of the European Social Bond Fund. Now, these are impact funds. These are targeting the use of proceeds towards doing good for society, but also giving you the return you should expect for the risk that you're taking.
Thank you, Simon. Also, like what we just heard, really, it's based on values, but then really finding solutions, how to make that work in the business world, how to also create systems that are inclusive. And I promise you several examples, and we will hear like very different ones. So, Gerda, let's start with you. You already mentioned in Erste Bank and also the Zweite Sparkasse, we're really also focusing on including the unbanked. Can you share a little more what you created?
More than happy to do so. So, I think, and please, I think that's a very important fact, and you know this, but we are a bank, and we want to stay a bank. We are not a better NGO, and this is also not our aim. It's not about donations. Of course, we also donate, but I think what we stand for as Erste is that we want to support our clients and also the regions in which we operate by helping them to help themselves. And this is also then why we came up with an idea of how can we grant access to financial services to people who usually don't have this access, because Zweite Sparkasse, and this is the example that I already mentioned, is around now for more than 15 years. And in Austria, back then, there was a situation where there were many people not having a banking account. This was long before there was a European directive saying that you need to get a basic account or you can get this anywhere. So we were struggling and thinking of a way and a solution for those people to help them to find back into an ordinary financial life. And this is then, we came up with the zweite Sparkasse, and this is still, I don't know if I should be happy or not happy about this, it's still needed. Although basic accounts are around, you can get this at every bank, but still the combination of getting access to financial services, having an account, but also it's about the right advisory to it. Then, because one of the lessons learned in the whole exercises that we had is it's not only about the financial, not only about the access to financial services, but it's also about financial literacy. So people need to know what they can do or what they should not do when it comes to financial services. And this is where we can play a very strong role as a bank.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for your leadership on that and also sharing it out for other banks, maybe to do the same. That also reminds me, if you have any questions in the audience, be it online or here in the room, please put them also into Slido. Definitely want to get to them as well, and I have reserved some time for that. But now, over to you, Gabriela. You at the Impact Hub also, create projects or programs really supporting female migrant entrepreneurs, the youth. Can you share a few examples, how you created that they are really inclusive?
It's a learning journey, so I can share what we know now, but really this topic needs to be more of an open research for many of us and to support each other in learning even better. As Impact Hub, we work, as I said, with about 24,000 entrepreneurs and innovators around the world, half of which are women. So it's a very high prevalence of women-led enterprises that we have. And we have run a number of studies and programs to understand why are we so effective in actually attracting and supporting women-led enterprises across the world. And what we learned is, in particular, I would say 2 highlights. There's a lot more, and you can find that on our website, but 2 insights. One of them is the accessibility of the offering oftentimes is off track with most other offerings, so we have a very easy threshold for women to engage in our programs. It's not a very complex selection process. It's usually a very group setting, so it's a lot safer than the individual focused selection mechanisms. And we focus very strongly on mentorship, and that mentorship starts already from the selection process, not just after they are selected, so that they can actually better apply and better understand the opportunities that are at hand. So I would say that's something that we've learned around women, and we're doing that around the world. For example, here in Romania, in the region, let's bring it closely, and also in Turkey, we do a lot of work actually on getting women-led enterprises in the agri-food industry, which is an industry where under a third are enterprises that are led by women. So the opportunity is big, there's very few examples, there's a lot of funds, there's a lot of future need for this industry to grow, and that's, for example, where we're focusing on women entrepreneurs and getting them engaged, getting them accustomed to the industry and starting their businesses, and that's very successful in these countries at this point. On migrants, we've been doing that. I think our first program was about 8 years ago, together with the European Program for Integration and Migration, where we identified 20 most promising innovations from across Europe, from all the countries in Europe, on basically migrant-led and migrant-focused enterprises. And we're using some of the capacities and models that we learned from that particular program to continue supporting. There, of course, it's a lot more complex because there isn't one form of migrant, right? There's about 6 different forms of migrants, and each country has very complex regulations and legal systems around this topic. So what we notice is that the need is very much for partnership with direct response organizations so that we can provide the entrepreneurship development, but in the context of other organizations providing the legal support, maybe the childcare support, maybe the basic health support that are needed by these entrepreneurs. So we really need to think more of a 360 degrees offering on migrants rather than just entrepreneurial skills. That's our big lesson there. And on youth, I think many of us work with youth. We work with people from the age of 20 to 34. That's about basically those that are not employed, not educated, not in education or in training. And that's about 17% average in Europe, and in Central Eastern Europe is over 18%, actually. So there's a lot of youth that needs a direction, needs support, needs an opportunity to develop, and social entrepreneurship is a good opportunity here. I think Social Impact Award, many people know as a program that we do often together with them, but we also have a lot of other initiatives. I believe in Armenia, we're working on cultural entrepreneurship, developing digital skills, developing crowdfunding opportunities for youth to engage with. And the main lesson on the youth entrepreneurship side is, of course, the importance of role models and culture, right? So what are we telling our youth around should they become entrepreneurs or rather not? Who is there to mentor them? Who is there to give an opportunity and an inspiration on how it can be done? And we're bringing a lot of that in the format of our programs. I can also speak a bit about senior, we call them silver entrepreneurs, so people over 50 that are starting their businesses. The great news is that they're 2 to 3 times more likely than under 30 entrepreneurs to succeed. So that's, for example, a statistic that should be in our minds. They're obviously highly skilled, they know the business life, they know a lot of things, and they have connections, which often helps. And a lot with women and migrants, the networks are not there, right? And of course, there's a whole chapter on people on disabilities. We work there with some strong partners who have a long track record, and we're still learning. I think that's over 60% of the European population has a form of disability. So it's a big market. Unfortunately, the formats are usually very costly to adapt them. So we're learning how we can make it more available by going directly in their communities. So instead of doing programs in our usual locations and in the usual formats, how about we go directly in their communities and deliver there, because their communities are more adapted to provide for all their needs.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriela, for sharing all these different examples. And really what I'm hearing clearly is about this holistic approach, right? And thinking like, how do we need to design the whole program? Not only like, how do we make the selection, but also then the program designed that really also, people from different, different backgrounds and different diversity aspects feel comfortable and to really fulfill their full potential. So thank you for sharing that. Then Rana, I also know you really work a little more focused on racial equity, which is an important topic. And yeah, do you have one example, maybe working with investors or philanthropists, like how the strategy can look there?
Yeah, well, I think in the work that I do around capacity building for investors and philanthropies, I do that on an individual and collective basis because it's important that we act individually, but there's also some collective challenges that we need to address within our sector when it comes to ensuring that we can maximize our impact on inequality. And I think the starting point for this is really about clarifying what do we mean by inequality and what do we mean by advancing equality. SDG 10, all the SDGs are a useful entry point for this, but we need to go much further if we really want to develop a sound understanding of how inequalities operate, how different groups are impacted by inequality, and what the drivers are, and therefore what the solutions are, how we can tackle inequality. And the first thing to understand is that inequality is multidimensional. So you can't think of inequality in isolation from other factors. It's connected to health, education, questions around identity, so gender, migration, citizenship status, in the same way that you can't address climate change without also considering equality impacts. So we really need to think about these things in connection with each other. Another piece of this is to appreciate the structural variables of inequality, that there are norms, policies, systems, legacy systems that are in place which are shaping and reproducing inequalities. And so we also need to be aware of these and whether our efforts are sufficient in tackling those structural barriers. And so what this boils down to for all investors is that there's no such thing as neutral investing when it comes to inequality. We heard Katrine say earlier this morning that it's the end of the neutrality paradigm, and that's certainly the case when it comes to investing. You're either having a negative impact or you're having a positive impact. And so the challenge is, do you have enough information, and can you say with certainty that your investments are not having a negative impact on equality? So then the next question is, what can we do? How do we act on inequality? And there are a number of investment strategies that can be pursued, and we need capital flowing, more capital flowing in this direction. We already heard some great examples here today. Investing in ventures that are led by marginalized communities. So we have a lot of momentum in the gender lens investing movement, investing in Black or minority, ethnic-led enterprises, refugee-led enterprises, disability, LGBTQ. So these are all areas of equality impact investing that are growing. And I think also it's very important to apply an intersectional lens when we think about these groups. So women are differentiated amongst themselves, so thinking about inequalities within each segment. It's also important, one way of investing in inequality is looking at the equality practice of your investees. Big Issue Invest and Unlimited in the UK are now developing a tool that will allow investors to be able to understand how their investees are progressing on different EDI factors and to support them in that journey. So that's another way that we can try to increase equality impact. And of course, investing in ventures and organizations whose core mission and purpose is to tackle inequality, either by mitigating the impacts of it or by trying to advance inclusion or equality. And then you need to consider your own investment process and how your own systems are set up to enable you to achieve those equality goals and equality strategies. And what's become increasingly well documented, I would say in the UK especially, perhaps you have similar studies here in Europe, is that discrimination does exist in terms of access to finance, to social finance for certain communities, and that there are structural barriers. So for example, Social Investment Business in the UK recently did an analysis of their Recovery and Resilience Loan Fund. They looked at the applications by certain demographics and the drop-off rate. Who was more likely to receive funding of the applicants and who was less likely to receive funding. And it was very clear that the drop-off rates were exceedingly high for Black and minority ethnic applicants. That led them to go back through the process and understand where they were tripping, where the barriers were. And through that, they've made some adjustments, including to their eligibility criteria. There's a very powerful tool developed by the phenomenal Joy Anderson at the Criterion Institute. If you haven't come across them, please do look them up. It's a tool for investors to essentially carry out a power analysis of your investment process. And that's important because we have further figures from the UK, from a group called the Diversity Forum, which looked at who works within the social and impact investment sector. And what they found was that 18% of social investment directors come from an Oxbridge educational background. That number is about less than 1% in the general population. And that 7% of directors had a Black or minority ethnic background. That's in comparison to 14% of the general population. And now the Diversity Forum has introduced a manifesto, and a number of social investors have signed on to try and address some of these issues, because the sector itself is quite exclusive and homogenous. But that is changing. There's more recognition of the value of having lived experience and people from the communities and issues that we're working on at the table and working within the sector. And again, another great example is Big Issue Invest has just launched a new equality-focused impact fund. And they sat down and looked at, well, what kind of expertise do we need within our investment committee, and have a completely different a completely different composition than what you might usually find. So people closer to the communities with lived experience who are probably in a different position to bring expertise on the kinds of investments that will be most successful and needed. So we really do need to look at these questions of how power dynamics are playing out within the sector and whether that's impeding our ability to have an impact on inequality. And so ultimately, I think that we need to work collectively together as a sector to address some of these. It's wonderful to be able to have one-off funds, but there are some cross-cutting issues that we need to work on together. We've set up a coalition in the UK. It's been up and running for 3 years now. It includes infrastructure bodies like the Impact Investing Institute, policymakers, the Access Foundation for Social Investment, and equality and human rights organizations to try to understand how can we create the enabling conditions for more capital to flow for equality impact. And so I can talk more a little bit later about some of the other fronts that we need to work on collectively in order to try to increase our impact as a sector on equality and inclusion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rana. It really is about collaboration and courage, which is also the theme, obviously, of today and tomorrow. And thank you for those statistics. And definitely, I already heard a little bit policy. We'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to bring in one more perspective from the public markets. So, Simon, you work for Columbia Threadneedle, big asset manager, and are selecting public social bonds. And you also have like a pretty clear, catalog of criteria. Which bonds are you including? We heard earlier today, greenwashing is a big problem. So there you have really strict criteria in terms of social. Could you share what these are and how do you approach it?
Thank you. Yes, and Rana makes some very, very good references. I'm on the advisory council for the Impact Investing Institute. Big Society Capital was seed investors in the UK fund, and Big Issue Invest are our social partner for the Social Bond Fund. What are we trying to do with a fund that can only access publicly tradable bonds? What we're trying to do is focus on three things. We're trying to focus on benefits to society, and that means we focus on deprivation, underserved communities, areas of society that perhaps need help through finance. And that would include the new technology that the bond market has developed, the green bond principles in 2014, the social bond principles in 2017. We were on the ICMA committee that developed those. But what these are essentially green bonds, social bonds, and indeed sustainability bonds. They are use of proceeds bonds. What you can do is follow the money through to the use of proceeds and analyze the good that particular money does for society. Now, that allows any particular entity to issue into those kinds of markets using those kinds of bonds, including Erste Bank, I might add. And so that allows us to use the new technology that the bond market has been developing to further those particular aspects. What we're also looking for is additionality. We want to fund additional benefits for society. So we're looking for spending that actually buys more infrastructure, that funds more services, etc. And then finally, what we're looking for is quality impact reporting. And the great thing about the new bonds that I've referred to is that they require, through those principles, impact reporting on an annual basis. So we will use those. And let me just give you two examples of those broad categories. So we were talking about SDG 10. I'm going to focus on SDG 5, actually, because we have things called gender bonds, which are social bonds. So the Asian Development Bank are the most recent issuer of a gender bond. And that is financing women-led businesses or women in the workplace, specifically with its use of proceeds. We also talked about refugees. I'm very glad to say that an institution that we're very close to, Council of Europe Development Bank, have issued, don't call it a refugee bond, but it's a bond that supports communities that are taking in refugees from Ukraine, specifically targeting the education, targeting the housing, targeting the needs of refugees through the use of proceeds. And that was a bond we were very happy to support. Indeed, that particular institution was set up in the 1950s with the specific purpose of responding to a refugee crisis. Unfortunately, we've come full circle to find ourselves with that refugee crisis once again. Again, just advocating what we can do with the bond market in a way that responds to the needs of society. The great explosion of social bonds came 2 years ago. The reason that explosion in issuance came was because we had a pandemic, a social crisis. And so a social crisis led to an enormous increase in issuance of bonds that responded to that social crisis. pandemic response bonds that came from many institutions, and they didn't just come in size, they came very, very quickly to the market. Within weeks of the lockdowns that we saw in 2020, the issuance of those pandemic response bonds. So we can use that kind of bond in order to deliver on those three particular aspects through the fund itself. And what we're looking to do is to optimize the impact on society and give you the financial return you should expect for the risk that you're taking within a fund structure using publicly tradable bonds.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Really, what you mentioned, additionality, very important, right? To see if it's really impact or just focusing on financial returns, deprivation, and then also different social impact measurements you're using also on the public side. So also similar, Gerda.
Can I pick up on this?
Please, yes.
Because thank you for mentioning Erste. But I think what is important is the funds that are increasingly available, let's put it that way, where I see also a very strong role for Erste and for all banks actually is to open up our client base when it comes to our retail community. So we are a retail bank, and of course in our advisory services we very much focus also on ESG bonds and putting a focus there, because we want to make sure that our retail clients invest in these funds. And this is where we can then bridge the gap between the funds that are available by asset management companies and so on. And we can try really to find the investors not only on an institutional level, but also on a private individual level. I think this is again the role of banks, where we can bridge the two worlds. And I think that's important, because it's not only what we directly finance. For us, that this is $500 million currently for Erste Group with social banking initiatives, but the means by our retail investors are way higher, and this is a multiple. So I think this is the base we have to get into when it really comes into directing the funds or the money to the funds where we really want them to be invested, and that's also I think a role for banks.
Yeah. Important.
Can I just come back on that? This is going to sound a little bit like a love-in, but I would say that we need banks in order to reach certain areas of the market, in order to fund certain areas of the market, because what banks are aggregators. They're institutions that can borrow big and then can lend small. And if you think about the institutional bond market, you need to be a fairly large institution in order to issue a bond. So we need aggregators. We need to be able to follow the money through to the use of proceeds and that on lending, which is what we do through the banks, through other aggregators within social housing, within charitable areas, et cetera, So we need these aggregators to borrow big in the institutional bond markets through these kinds of instruments in order to then fund on a more granular basis what are very deserving causes through that on lending.
I couldn't agree more. For example, this $500 million that I mentioned is spread over almost 40,000 clients. And this you could not do on a bond level. This is what we can do as a bank. And I think this is what is a win-win situation for both of us.
Yeah, thank you to you all for sharing these different examples. So you really see from different approaches, from a bank directly, including the unbanked, to asset managers creating opportunities also for private investors, to accelerators supporting entrepreneurs, then working with policymakers and also philanthropists and really collaborating with each other. Very different approaches, to equality and inclusion in the financial system. And actually, I do have two questions, so I want to take them briefly from the audience. And it might be one from you, Gabriela, but also open to anybody else. Alexandra is asking if you've ever made the experience that the wording social entrepreneur frightens investors in terms that the performance could not be adequate.
Yes, the term is sometimes an issue, of course. We actually don't really use the term very often. More so we talk about impact entrepreneurs and we leave it quite open in terms of the terminology, not only because the investors might get scared, that's one reason, although less and less investors are scared. I think today, as many of you said on the panel, there's an increasing interest and an increasing openness, particularly in Europe, but often because the entrepreneur doesn't associate with that term. actually. Particularly if you come from a minority background, you probably never heard the term of social entrepreneur. So it's a term that you will not relate to. You're just starting a business in your mind, right? So you're just trying to make a livelihood, you're just trying to engage. It's not a term that we often use. Of course, we bring the thematics and the trends from the social enterprise movement and the models, and we make sure the principles are respected, but we often don't use actually this term, particularly in inclusive business. In fact, inclusive business is more often something that we've worked with in this particular topic than social enterprise. So it's a good question. It can be a put-off and oftentimes more of an impediment to make it accessible to many.
Yep. Anybody else made experiences with that term? Or?
I think what this points to is that we're seeing a proliferation of approaches within the impact economy, so that the term social entrepreneurship might have been more commonly used in the past, and now we're starting to see lots of different models, and our vocabulary is developing in the same way that our approaches are also becoming more refined. And I think that's where I would like to see the sector also move is in the same way that climate and questions around sustainability have become so integral to the sector. There's a task force on climate-related financial disclosure. There's, we talk about climate all the time. Can we also do the same thing around inequality? And so I think there's a new task force that's been established called the Task Force on Inequality-Related Financial Disclosure. The Impact Investing Institute hosted the G7 Impact Task Force last year, and they've promoted this new task force, asking finance ministers to sign on to it. So that is up and coming and something to watch. But I think that's what our sector needs to move to is becoming more open to different terminology, different models, different approaches that can integrate this idea of addressing questions around equity and inclusion.
That's actually a perfect segue.
Can I just pick up on? Oh, sorry. Can I just pick up on the G7 Impact Task Force? There was one particular concept that was like a thread running through that particular publication, and that was the concept of the just transition. And you mentioned right at the start that actually we shouldn't be thinking about the environment and social in separate terms. What we should be thinking about are the overall impacts. And sometimes those impacts are negative for the transition to a lower carbon economy. If I think in terms of the UK example, if I think about Aberdeen, the boom town of the oil and gas industry in the 1980s, we need to support the transition of areas like that to a lower carbon economy and bring along those communities, re-educate, repurpose, reskill those particular communities as part of what we're doing to try and meet the targets that we have. Because ultimately, it matters for social as much as it does environmental. If we get the environment wrong, it's going to create some tremendous social problems in the future. Equally, if we do get the environment right, it's going to cost an awful lot of money, and we need to make sure that that cost is not borne by those in society least able to afford it.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect segue to the also question around policy, right? The EU taxonomy is very much focusing on the environment, but I know several of you have been also involved to really, bring in more the social aspect and creating a taxonomy around that, or like some rules or really a system that also is inclusive. So maybe, Gabriela, starting with you, I know you've been working with the OECD. Maybe you can share a little bit of what you've been working on, maybe where your frustration is because you don't get further. What's your experience?
Well, first of all, we need to work on policy because there's all these funds coming, as you heard, and we don't have enough entrepreneurs with the right background and actually being able to scale their businesses so they can absorb all this capital that's made available. So we're working a lot on that, on the supply side of entrepreneurs, let's put it that way. Also at policy level. So we're doing one project together with EVPA, who's also a partner here, and the EBN network, and supported by the EU. It's called Better Incubation. And we're codifying all the practices around how to better incubate people from these minority backgrounds, the 5 that I spoke about before, and making this available and directly implement them in all sorts of business development support organizations. So not just social impact incubators, because that's a niche of incubators and accelerators, but actually mainstream business development support providers. Think universities, think rural business development units that are helping the locals integrate, think tech startups, and so on and so forth. So we're working with them to implement these practices so it becomes a standard in the industry, basically what you're saying. It's not something special, it's the way we do incubation and acceleration, and we pay attention to the differences when we work with people from these minority backgrounds. So that's one that we do with the EU. With the OECD, we're looking more at scaling. That's the second issue. There's not enough of them that scale. So we have a consortium of 18 partners across both Europe and Brazil, India, Mexico, as well as the Asia-Pacific countries, looking at how to scale social enterprises that are led by minority background entrepreneurs. And we're learning some very good insights around additional hurdles they have in internationalization, not just in starting their businesses, but really bringing them to other countries. That's a big policy issue. There's a lot of non-aligned regulations, there's a lot of fragmentations, and there's a lot more hurdles than we imagine. But actually, oftentimes enterprises led by minority background entrepreneurs are better fit for scaling because they're much more flexible in their models. And if we think of the scaling approaches, they require a lot of local adaptability, so a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnership, a lot of models that oftentimes minority background entrepreneurs have in their skill set. They are like this. They had to adapt. They had to be collaborative. They had to be very flexible in their approaches. But oftentimes they don't have the finances or the legal avenues or even the social or financial capital to scale. So that's another policy issue. Finally, we work with the UNHCR, so on the migrant angle. We're evaluating their 130 migrant entrepreneurship programs around the world to find the most effective methodologies, connecting them with the policy work that we do in the OECD and the EU, and being able to implement those best case practices back into their strategies so they're more effective locally, because they have many, but oftentimes the result is very small-scale enterprises that are barely survival enterprises rather than those that can absorb capital and grow. So they're a great partner, and they have the year of many governments around the world, so that's great. And last but not least, even here in Central Eastern Europe, with the OECD, we're working on the Better Entrepreneurship Policy tool, which has a particular segment focused on inclusive business. And it's about policymakers at more local, regional level. We're working, for example, in Central Bohemia, in the Czech Republic, with the local municipality and with the Innovation Institute of the region. Using this tool and practices is basically policy approaches from all the EU countries and a few of the OECD countries as well, on how to do inclusive business at policy level and change that. So we're helping with bringing the entrepreneur voice at the table and the policy framework.
Yeah, also very important aspect you're mentioning of like also acknowledging that we also here are speaking from a position of privilege, and to really have these communities that we are trying to support also part of the conversation, right? Very important to bring that in. Thank you for that. I know, Rana, that's also one aspect, right? Really important, and to dear to your heart to really like be also inclusive in those conversations. Maybe also diversity forum you already mentioned in terms of collaboration, having the right people at the table. Anything you would like to add?
I think I would say that it's probably a good moment for us as a sector to think about how do we upskill ourselves on this question of inequality. How do we become more comfortable and confident talking about it, and opening ourselves up to also bring in different perspectives, becoming more inclusive to people with lived experience of inequality. So I think that there's another pipeline question there, which is how do we equip ourselves? We've become very well equipped when it comes to understanding sustainability challenges. Can we also do the same in terms of really understanding the inequality challenges and how those are interconnected with all of these others that we're working on? So I think combined, and I think the other place that we need to spend a bit of time, which you've spoken about and we heard earlier today, is how do we innovate around fund design and product design. So there's some of the new funds that are coming online in the UK, and you referenced some of them already. For example, are looking at quasi-equity. So some of the instruments that we've been using may not be well equipped to support these kinds of enterprises. So this is where we need to get our heads around the table, think about what is the role of blended finance, how to stimulate, catalyze that even further.
Thank you, Rana. Yeah. And I want to bring in one more question actually from the audience, which is probably mostly for Gerda and also for Simon. It's a question from Bogdan. How can we create more sustainable financial instruments for retail investors to finance the social transformation?
So I mentioned already the funds that we have in place. In our case, it's Erste Asset Management, which is, I think, well-established and well-known asset management company in Austria. And they started at a very, very early stage to discuss what ESG can mean for the setup of funds. And we have, for example, Fair Invest is one of our funds where we really have dedicated SDGs that are then in the focus of this fund. And this we do one fund after the other. I think because retail investors are now the focus of the question, we are also part, and I think that's a very interesting exercise, not that well known, of the Green Consumption Pledge by the European Commission. This was actually put out where companies committed that they engage more in the discussions with consumers, where we also committed ourselves to increase transparency when it comes to funds for consumers and raise awareness. I think that's the general to-do out of this exercise. And it might be initiatives like these that can help. And for us, it's part of our DNA because it's part of the advisory in our banks. And I think it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also from an economic perspective, there is a clear interest and a clear demand by the consumer. So I think this is a given, and on this we have to leverage.
Thank you. Very briefly, Simon, you also obviously, like, your product is also available to retail investors. Anything you'd like to add briefly?
It is indeed. The other thing that I wanted to say is that we launched a campaign in May 2019 in the UK for the issuance of a green gilt, a green government bond. And actually associated with that, there was a similar retail product that hasn't been quite so successful. What retail investors want to have is diversification. They want somebody to be able to manage. They don't want direct individual risks like that. So actually putting it through fund offerings or putting it through those types of products that actually give you a values-based approach and talk about, in our case, we talk about social alpha, outperforming on the social characteristics of the fund. So a lot of people will talk about financial alpha. What we will do is we will optimize the social alpha. So that's the kind of approach I think that retail investors should be looking for the values, looking for what the actual fund is trying to do through the investments that they make. In our case, of course, it's investment. And so it stops at the point where you start to sacrifice financial return. You can go further with impact, but that's called altruism, philanthropic endeavor, and indeed charity. So actually, we can push the boundaries as far as we can within the financial system, within investments, to the point where we can optimize the social value, but at the same time give you the financial return you should expect for the risk.
Thank you. Yeah, if I may add, because I think that's important also when it comes to funds, and I'm pretty sure, Simon, you could also agree to this statement. It does not mean necessarily that you give up on performance wishes when you look into ESG funds. I think it is a mistake to think that these are not performing. They are very well performing, and if you look, and I think the comparison over the last years has been a very good one for ESG funds. So I think it's we need to get this out of people's head, that they think if they invest into a social fund or an ESG fund, that they will not get a high performance.
Thank you. I think that is a topic that would take a lot more time to talk about, which we don't have right now. So thank you so much, Gerda, Gabriela, Rana, and Simon, for sharing several examples how we really can create systems that are, inclusive. I hope each of you also took a little bit an idea of, like, yes, the five of us, are working on it, but each one of us can do, their point. And we always like to think about action. So maybe think about one thing you do want to do after this conference, be it maybe researching. There's lots of, statistics out there. and maybe seeing maybe yourself investing, right, in a social bond, you as investor, retail investor, or get engaged, in Accelerator. There's lots more to do. We'll see where we stand next year. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is your applause. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you to the speakers for giving us a better understanding of the challenges that we're still facing, and also Christine for asking for action steps, which is what we need. And with no further ado, I invite all of you to make your way to the breakout sessions, which are starting right now. We've got 4 sessions again in the same area, just outside here to the left, to the right. And I see all of you back here in exactly an hour at 5:40. In our online audience, you also have 2 sessions that are happening right now. Enjoy and see you later. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.